My parents attacked my character and told me I was immature. Now I don't know who I am. After years of being told I was emotionally mature, their sudden accusations left me feeling confused, hurt, and unsure of who I really am. I have always prided myself on being emotionally mature for my age. At 15 years old, I find that I often understand my emotions and the emotions of others better than many of my peers. It wasn't something that I worked at. It was just part of who I was. Adults around me, teachers, even strangers, had often remarked on how mature I was for my age. They'd say things like, "You have such a clear head on your shoulders," or "You're so much more self-aware than most kids your age." It made me feel like I had a responsibility to continue being level-headed and composed even when things got tough. But little did I know this very maturity I took pride in would become the thing that caused the rift between my parents and me. I had always felt a close bond with both of my parents. Growing up, we had a family dynamic that was open and communicative. They were never the type to sugarcoat things, but I appreciated their honesty. Whenever I went through a tough time, I could talk to them about it and they would listen, guide me, and offer advice. It wasn't always easy, but I felt understood. However, somewhere along the way, this understanding shifted. I think it all started when I was around 14. My parents began to expect more from me than I could give. Maybe it's because I'm an only child, or maybe it's because they saw my emotional maturity and decided that I was capable of handling things that most teenagers struggle with. Whatever the reason, it started to feel like they were putting more pressure on me than I could bear. When I was upset, they expected me to handle it calmly as if I were an adult. If I cried over a bad grade or had a fight with a friend, they would say things like, "You need to be stronger than this," or "Why are you so upset? You should be able to manage this." To them, it was as if I were supposed to be the picture of perfect emotional composure at all times. If I didn't meet their expectations, they saw it as a sign that I couldn't cope with life. I knew I wasn't perfect. Of course, I had my bad days, but I always tried to manage them the best I could. But instead of showing compassion or empathy when I was struggling, they began to criticize me for not being strong enough. It started as small comments, things like, "You're too sensitive," or "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" But it escalated. Slowly, I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells around them, trying to maintain an image of emotional maturity. When inside, I felt just like any other teenager, confused, vulnerable, and unsure of myself. The argument began on a typical evening. We had just finished dinner, and everything seemed fine. My parents and I were sitting at the table chatting about the usual things. School, the weather, my friends. But then, as always seems to happen, the conversation shifted. I don't even remember how it started, but my mom suddenly brought up how I was handling a situation at school. I had gotten a bad grade on a test and my parents were concerned. They asked me why I hadn't studied harder, why I hadn't asked for help when I was struggling. I explained that I had been working as hard as I could, and that sometimes, despite my best efforts, things didn't turn out the way I hoped. But instead of hearing me out, my mom immediately said, "You need to stop making excuses. If you were really handling it, you would have done better." My heart sank. Here I was trying to explain myself, and instead of support, I was being met with judgment. It wasn't that I was being lazy or neglectful. I had done everything I could, but they didn't seem to see that. They only saw what they expected from me: perfection. I tried to stand my ground, but as the conversation went on, it became clear that my parents didn't think I was capable of handling the stresses in my life. They expected me to be a grown-up, to deal with everything like a 30-year-old would. I told them, "I'm just a teenager and it's normal to have ups and downs. You can't expect me to always be okay," but they wouldn't hear it. My mom especially kept repeating that I couldn't manage my emotions, that I wasn't handling life properly. The more I tried to explain myself, the more they shut me down. "This isn't about you being a teenager," my mom said. "This is about you being emotionally immature." I was stunned. My entire life, my parents had praised me for my emotional maturity. They would tell me how proud they were that I could express myself so clearly, that I could work through problems instead of running away from them. Now they were telling me the opposite, that I was emotionally immature, that I couldn't cope with life like an adult. It didn't make sense. This wasn't just a simple disagreement. It felt like an attack on my character. I tried to explain that this wasn't the case. I told them, "I've been handling everything well. I deal with my emotions, and I've been managing my life just fine." But they didn't seem to care. Mom's response caught me off guard. "No, you don't. You've been acting like a child, and we're tired of it." It felt like I had been slapped in the face. I had always been the one who handled my emotions. Why were they suddenly saying I was incapable? The conversation escalated quickly after that. My dad joined in, agreeing with everything my mom said. They started listing all the times I had failed to meet their expectations, pointing out every moment where I hadn't lived up to their ideal version of emotional maturity. They said I was immature and unreliable, and it felt like they were attacking everything that made me who I was. At this point, I was becoming more upset. They were saying things that weren't true, accusing me of things I didn't feel I was guilty of. But when I tried to stand up for myself, when I tried to defend my perspective, they cut me off. Every time I spoke, my dad would tell me, "Let me talk. You've already said enough." I tried to explain my side, to give examples of how I had handled difficult situations in the past, but each time they shot me down. That's just one example. It doesn't prove anything they would say. I felt like I was trapped in a conversation where my voice didn't matter. It didn't matter how many times I tried to explain myself. They had already made up their minds. The whole thing was getting out of control. It was as if no matter how much I tried to prove I was emotionally capable, it wasn't enough. My parents were determined to see me as a failure, as someone who couldn't cope with life. And it hurt. It hurt, because deep down I knew I wasn't perfect, but I had always believed that I was doing the best I could. To have that dismissed, to be told that I wasn't handling things properly, was devastating. By the time the conversation ended, I felt emotionally drained. I was frustrated, upset, and confused. I couldn't understand why my parents, who had always been my support system, were now treating me like I was incompetent. But what hurt the most was that they didn't even seem to care about how I felt. It was as if my emotions didn't matter. All that mattered to them was that I met their expectations. No matter how unrealistic they were, left me feeling small, like I wasn't enough. I retreated to my room after the argument, hoping that things would cool down. But the pain lingered. How could my parents, the people I had always looked up to and trusted, treat me like this? How could they accuse me of being emotionally immature when I had always tried to be emotionally responsible? The questions swirled in my mind as I sat in my room alone and confused. This wasn't just an argument. It felt like the beginning of the end of something I had always believed in. My bond with my parents. But little did I know, things were about to get much worse. The days following that argument felt like a slow unraveling of everything I had once known. I spent most of my time in my room trying to avoid eye contact with my parents. When I did see them, the tension was palpable. Every word felt like a potential spark, ready to ignite the next fight. They seemed to have already made up their minds about me, and it was as if nothing I could say or do would change that. It wasn't just the words they had said during the argument that stung. It was the way they looked at me afterward. It was a mixture of disappointment and frustration, like they couldn't understand why I wasn't more like the person they envisioned. My mom would occasionally glance at me from across the room, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that felt like a silent accusation. She no longer saw me as her child to protect and guide. I had become a problem for her to fix. It was hard to bear. I had always been the one who listened, who understood the complexities of their lives. Now I felt completely disconnected from them. They were acting like strangers to me, as if I was someone they didn't know. The emotional maturity they once praised me for now felt like a curse. It wasn't an asset. It was a burden. The worst part was that every time I tried to talk to them, it only seemed to make things worse. I thought that if I explained myself more clearly, they might understand where I was coming from. But all I got in return were cold stares and frustrated sighs. It was like talking to a brick wall. My dad, who used to be my biggest supporter, now seemed indifferent to my feelings. I would try to express how hurt I was by their comments, but he would just brush me off, saying, "You need to stop being so sensitive. We're just trying to help you grow." But I didn't feel like I was growing. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations. They wanted me to be something I wasn't, to fit into a mold that didn't suit me. And with every passing day, it became clearer that the more I tried to show them who I was, the further away I pushed them. It wasn't just a simple difference of opinion. It felt like a fundamental divide that I didn't know how to cross. One afternoon, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I was so tired of pretending that everything was fine, tired of living in this emotional limbo. I needed to speak up to let them know how much I was struggling. I decided that this time I wouldn't back down. I waited until after dinner, when we were all in the living room, the TV playing quietly in the background. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation. "Mom, Dad," I started, my voice shaking a little. "We need to talk." My mom, who had been flipping through a magazine, looked up at me, her eyebrows furrowed. "What's wrong now?" she asked, her tone more dismissive than concerned. "I'm not okay," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I haven't been okay for a while, and I can't just keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not." The words hung in the air for a moment, and for the first time in days, the silence felt heavy. My dad put down his newspaper and looked at me. "What do you mean?" he asked, though there was a hint of impatience in his voice. I feel like you guys don't get me anymore," I said, trying to hold back tears. "I've always tried to be strong, to be mature, but lately it feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough for you. I'm trying my best, but it's like you expect me to be perfect all the time, and I'm not. I'm just a teenager." There was a long pause as my words settled in. My mom glanced at my dad, and I could see the look of concern in her eyes. But then she crossed her arms and said, "We're just trying to help you. We want you to be strong, to be independent. You can't keep relying on us forever." "I'm not relying on you," I said, my voice rising. "But I need support. I can't keep doing this alone. It's not fair to expect me to handle everything like an adult. I'm not an adult yet. I'm still figuring things out." At that moment, something shifted in my dad's expression. It wasn't exactly understanding, but there was a flicker of realization. "I think we've been putting a lot of pressure on you," he said slowly. "But you need to understand, we only want what's best for you." "I know that," I replied, feeling a mixture of frustration and sadness. "But it doesn't feel like you want what's best for me. It feels like you just want me to fit into a mold of what you think I should be." My mom opened her mouth as if to argue, but then she closed it again, looking at me with a soft expression. "I didn't realize we were making you feel like that," she said quietly. "But we really do want you to grow and be strong. We just want to see you succeed." "I get that," I said, my voice softening. "But I need you to see me as I am, not as you want me to be. I'm still learning. I don't have it all figured out. I need time to grow, to make mistakes and learn from them." My dad nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "But you also need to understand that life isn't easy. We just want to prepare you for the challenges ahead." "I know life isn't easy," I said, "but I don't need to face it alone. I need you to be there for me, to help me when I ask for it. Not to criticize me when I'm struggling." The first time in days, it felt like we were having a real conversation, one where I wasn't being dismissed or ignored. But as much as I wanted to believe that this would resolve everything, I knew it wasn't that simple. The wounds from the past few days couldn't be healed in a single conversation. But at least for a moment, we were seeing each other as we were imperfect and vulnerable. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. And for the first time in a while, I felt like there was hope. The next morning when I woke up, the exhaustion from the previous night hadn't worn off. I had cried so much the night before, feeling suffocated by the constant criticism from my parents. Everything had been so clear to me until now. I've always felt like I'm mature for my age, able to handle my emotions and situations on my own. But right now, their denial of that maturity, the way they questioned my ability to cope, left me feeling utterly confused. Every word they said felt like a sharp jab to my heart. They claimed I was too full of myself, that my perception of who I was wasn't correct. I know I'm not perfect, but hearing this from them, the people I trusted most, made me feel like I was being completely misunderstood. I tried to explain that everyone has moments of vulnerability and frustration, but they just didn't seem to care. They were convinced that I was incapable of managing myself or my emotions. When my dad came into my room that morning, his face was twisted with anger, and I knew this was going to be bad. His harsh words came at me like a battering ram. "You're not mature. You're just a child throwing a tantrum," he said, his voice rising. My heart sank. How could he say that about me? I had been doing everything I could to manage my life and emotions, yet he refused to see that I wanted to argue back to make him understand, but whenever I tried, he cut me off, saying things like, "You're just being emotional. You're not seeing the truth." It was like every time I spoke, he was putting up a wall between us. He wouldn't even let me finish a sentence, constantly interrupting, calling me a filibusterer just for sharing my side of the story. I tried to tell them how their constant criticism had affected me over the years. All the hurtful things they'd said, the way they'd made me feel like I wasn't good enough. But instead of listening, they pulled out the same tired lines. "So it's all our fault now. We're the bad parents," they accused. I couldn't believe it. Every time I tried to explain myself, they dismissed my feelings, saying I was just telling myself stories or lying to make myself feel better. How could they do this to me? It didn't stop there. As the argument escalated, they became more aggressive. My mom literally barged into my room, pushing open the door with force. And my dad, his face filled with rage, lunged toward me with an intensity I had never seen before. The look in his eyes terrified me. I ran out of the room shouting, "You're scaring me." I had never felt this unsafe in my own home before. They came outside and demanded I return, but I refused. They threatened to call the police, but I didn't care anymore. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside that house, where they had just made me feel so small and insignificant. They used the one thing they knew would get to me: hockey. My entire world. My escape from everything that was going wrong. "If you don't come back inside, I'll cancel hockey for you," my mom threatened. At that moment, I felt my heart break. I couldn't risk losing the one thing that kept me going. So reluctantly, I went back inside feeling defeated and emotionally drained. It was already past midnight, and I hadn't gotten a proper night's sleep in days, but they didn't care. The argument had dragged on for hours, and I was completely exhausted. They knew how tired I was, yet they kept pushing, kept demanding more from me until I felt like I had nothing left to give. The next morning, I woke up late. My school started at 7:30, but I didn't even get up until 7:32. I had no energy, and I didn't want to face them again. My parents were both home and could have driven me, but they didn't. Instead, I had to walk 40 minutes in the pouring rain just to get to school. I missed my first period, which could mean detention and ruin my record. I sat in class, still drenched from the rain, feeling completely repulsed by the thought of going back to that house. I didn't know how to fix things with them anymore. The bond we once shared felt shattered. They didn't see me, they didn't understand me. And now I didn't know how to trust them anymore. How could I, when they had treated me this way? I didn't want to share any part of myself with them again. I didn't want to go home, and I didn't want to be a part of a family that had made me feel so alone. The days that followed were no better. I couldn't shake off the feeling that everything had changed, that something inside me had broken irreparably. Each time I saw my parents, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The tension was thick, suffocating, and it seemed impossible to escape. I kept replaying that night over and over in my head, the hurtful words, the angry accusations, the way my dad had lunged at me with such aggression. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I started withdrawing more and more. I stopped engaging in family conversations and spent most of my time in my room trying to avoid the emotional turmoil that seemed to follow me everywhere. They tried to act like nothing had happened, as if everything could go back to normal, but I knew it wasn't that simple. How could it be? They had attacked me, destroyed my sense of self, and now I didn't know how to face them. When I did try to speak up, it felt like they were dismissing everything I said. They didn't listen. And when they did, it was only to call me emotional or to accuse me of being dramatic. It was exhausting. Every word they spoke felt like an insult, a reminder that I wasn't good enough for them. No matter what I did, I started questioning myself more than ever before, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I was too emotional, maybe I was too sensitive, and maybe I was just imagining all of this. One day, I decided to confront them. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine, like I wasn't deeply hurt by the way they had treated me, so I gathered what little courage I had left and sat down with them. I tried to explain how their words had affected me, how their constant criticism had eroded my confidence and my trust in them. I wanted them to see me, to hear me, but they didn't. Instead, my mom immediately dismissed my feelings. "You're just being too sensitive. We're only trying to help you. Why can't you understand that?" she said, her tone cold and uninterested. My dad sat there in silence, his arms crossed, not saying a word. It was like talking to a wall. They didn't get it. They didn't see the damage they had caused, and I couldn't keep pretending like I was okay with it. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to cry in front of them again. I had already cried too much, too many times. Instead, I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't want to say anything else because I knew it wouldn't matter. They would never understand, and I was starting to accept that the days after that conversation were the hardest. I tried to focus on school, on hockey, on anything that could keep me occupied and away from the reality of my broken relationship with my parents. But nothing worked. The pain of feeling misunderstood and unloved lingered, and I couldn't escape it. Every time I saw them, every time I thought about them, it felt like my heart was being torn apart all over again. I started to realize that maybe it wasn't just a matter of being misunderstood. Maybe this was deeper. Maybe it wasn't just about the argument we had or the things they said in the heat of the moment. Maybe it was about something bigger, about how I had always felt like I was never good enough for them, no matter how hard I tried. There was always this unspoken expectation that I should be perfect, that I should handle everything with ease, without ever breaking down or showing weakness. But I'm human. I make mistakes. I struggle. I get upset. I need help. But they never saw that. Instead, they saw me as a failure, someone who couldn't live up to their impossible standards. And now I was left wondering if I would ever be able to heal from the wounds they had inflicted. A week had passed since that last confrontation, and everything was still hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. There were no apologies, no understanding. Just an awkward silence that seemed to envelop every room I entered. I had been doing my best to just get through the days, to keep up with school, with hockey, with life. But it was like I was living in a fog. Nothing felt real anymore. My parents, once my biggest supporters, had become strangers to me. I didn't know who they were anymore, and I didn't know who I was in their eyes. The worst part was that I couldn't escape them. I couldn't just leave and forget everything that had happened. I was stuck in this house, in this situation, and I had no idea how to fix it. It felt like a part of me was dying inside every time I had to interact with them. And the worst part was, I felt like I had no one else to turn to. I had friends. Yes, but none of them could understand what I was going through. How could they? They hadn't seen the side of my parents that I had seen. They hadn't experienced the hurtful words, the constant criticism, the feeling that no matter how hard they tried, nothing would ever be good enough. The tension continued to build, and I began to question everything about my life. I started wondering if I was the problem, if I was really as emotionally immature and irrational as they claimed. It was like a spiral, each thought pulling me deeper into doubt and confusion. I had always been the one to reassure others, to tell them that everything would be okay, to handle my emotions maturely. But now, I didn't know how to reassure myself. I didn't know what was real anymore. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, I heard the door creak open. I turned, half expecting it to be one of my parents, but it wasn't. It was my mom. She stood there in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "I want to talk," she said, her voice flat. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much everything had changed, but I couldn't. Another part of me wanted to just ignore her, to pretend I didn't care, but I knew that wasn't going to solve anything. So I nodded, though my heart was pounding in my chest. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was deafening, and I could feel the weight of the years of frustration, of hurt, pressing down on both of us. Finally, she spoke. "I know things have been hard between us," she said, her voice softer now, though still distant. "I know I've said things that have hurt you, and I'm sorry I didn't know what to say." I just stared at her, unsure if I could even believe her. How could I? The things she had said to me, the way she had treated me, weren't things that could be easily undone with an apology. But I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to start another fight. So I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. "You've been distant," she said, her eyes searching mine. "You've been pulling away, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make things right." I wanted to scream, to tell her that it wasn't just my fault, that it wasn't just me pulling away, but I kept my mouth shut. I was tired of talking. I was tired of trying to make them see my point of view when it felt like they were never really listening. So I nodded again, hoping she would take the hint that I wasn't ready to talk about it. She sighed, a deep, heavy sound that made my heart ache. "I just want things to go back to normal," she said, almost pleading. "I want to fix this." I wanted to say something, anything to make things better, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't tell her that everything had changed. I couldn't tell her that I didn't know how to trust her anymore. Instead, I just shook my head, my throat tight with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can ever go back to how things were," I said quietly, my voice cracking. "You've hurt me too much." And for the first time in a long time, I saw something in her eyes. It was a flicker of guilt, a trace of something that looked like regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She didn't say anything else after that. She just turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left there feeling more confused than ever. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix this, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to how things were. I couldn't forget the way they had treated me, the way they had destroyed my trust. No matter how much they apologized, no matter how many times they tried to make things right. I wasn't sure I could ever see them the same way again. I was at a crossroads. I could either try to salvage what little was left of my relationship with my parents, or I could walk away, leave everything behind, and start fresh. But no matter what I chose, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. If you found this story moving or thought-provoking, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. Your support means a lot and helps us bring you even more content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.